My wife, 31 female, and I, 30 male, were together for 3 years and married for one. We were both very athletic people. We actually met in a gym and started flirting immediately. It was so easy to be around her and talk. I never talked so much before I met her. We became best friends and lovers. When we got married, our parents were just as excited as us. My parents paid for most of our wedding and helped us purchase furniture and things to start off. A new gym opened by our house, so we got memberships right away. I was really optimistic and hopeful at this point in my life. I really had no idea how challenging marriage could be. After just 1 year of marriage, it was like the infatuation wore off, and we started to get irritated with each other. She felt like I wasn't opening up or communicating enough, but sometimes I just wasn't in the mood to talk. Nothing was bothering me. I just didn't have anything to say. We got through this once by talking things out, acknowledging our differences, and promising to focus more on each other's needs instead of our own. Then my wife suddenly started having her gym trainer over to her house twice a week. Her reasoning was that she'd hit a plateau, and bringing the trainer to her would help her to reach her new goals. Well, I wasn't born yesterday. We didn't have weights or machines in our house. I knew our relationship was getting older, and my wife was naturally a very flirty woman. I didn't want to be overly controlling and tell her I didn't want him in our house. I just wanted to see what she'd do with this freedom and trust. We had a hired security guard at our home, so I didn't feel overly anxious when I had to go to work. After the second week she had her trainer at the house, I arrived home and asked him if my wife was behaving. He just shrugged uncomfortably. I asked him what he thought was going on, and he said he couldn't give me a fair guess because each time she had the trainer over, she sent him on a break. I was appalled. My wife was dismissing the man that could tell me if she was cheating. I asked if I could pay him extra to keep an eye on my wife, even if he had to lie to her and pretend he was going on break. He agreed. It was nearly summer, so my wife had the side windows of the house open on the day our security guard snapped pictures for me. I was at work 4 days after I asked him to watch her when I received them. It was like a slap in the face. I didn't actually expect my wife to be sleeping with her trainer, but my small suspicion and bribery led to the brutal truth. I was being cheated on by a shallow, flirty, sleazy woman that I tried to call my wife. I trusted her and gave her everything I could offer, but it wasn't enough for her to try and live an honorable life with me as her husband. All these thoughts and more rushed through my head as I printed the picture evidence and drove home from work. I thanked the security guard with a wave the moment before I unlocked and shoved the door open. They must have heard the door unlocking because they quickly got into positions that looked like training. With trembling hands and a faltering voice, I showed them the printed pictures of what they just did minutes earlier. The trainer's face turned ghostly white. He didn't want me to kill him, so ran out instantly and sped away in his car. My wife dropped her knees. She said this was the first and only major mistake she'd ever made in her life. She promised that if I forgave her for this, she would become the perfect example of what a wife should be to her husband. I completely doubted this, but I'm not a very expressive person, and the level of emotion I was feeling was too much to bear. I reverted back to spy mode, knowing I wouldn't stay married to this woman. No matter what, she would suffer for this. I told her that only a loyal, good wife deserves the things I provided for her, like jewelry, a hairstylist, a car, high-end clothing and shoes, everything. So I packed it all away and locked it in the trunk of my car. It took all day, and my wife was sobbing almost the entire time. Even though she swore to do everything I asked of her, she didn't help me. I think she might have suspected I was going to divorce her, but she was too afraid to ask. She also didn't want to tell her parents anything about what was going on, because they raised her right. They wouldn't be dashing to her rescue just because she let another man inside her home. No responsible or honorable woman does that. She slept on the couch for a week without her normal routine or privileges. She actually cleaned a lot, in the hopes that would earn my forgiveness. While she scrubbed the floors like Cinderella, I plopped divorce papers down. She really lost it. When she realized none of her begging and sobbing worked on me, she left the house to call her parents. They came and got her, but only long enough to lecture her, buy her some Walmart clothes, and bring her back to my house. It was humorous and frustrating at the same time. Eventually the divorce was done. Through the process, she was sleeping on the couch of our home until she was ordered to leave. She tried asking if she was entitled to half of my business, and the judge laughed at her. He shook his head and told her she had a lot of growing up to do, that she lost a great man and provider because of her actions. She didn't even have enough patience in our marriage to ensure she was entitled to half my business upon divorce. She made it clear that she wasn't very bright, and she only thought about herself. OP, I am so sorry your wife went behind your back to sleep with her trainer. She brought him to your house while you worked for no reason other than to start an affair. A mature woman would never flirt or put herself in a situation to be alone with another man. Marriage has enough drama and tribulations without unnecessary temptation. Two people with individual minds must be willing to be honest and do everything in their power to have empathy and consideration for the person they married. It's lucky you have a security guard to clue you in on what was happening sooner rather than later. Your wife didn't deserve the life of security and love you had in store for her, and thankfully you weren't married long enough for her to get any part of what you worked so hard for. Thank you for sharing your story. I wish you all the best. Now let's get into our second story for today. My wife and I were married for a long time. She was never very fond of fishing. My father raised me with a fishing rod in hand by the water or on a boat, so she went along with me sometimes, but for the most part she didn't want me to go. After years of marriage we learned about compromising, so we let the other person come and go as they pleased as long as we kept each other in the loop. My wife would often go visit her mother or siblings. I would go fishing. I met a man at the lake who also liked to fish. He was great at it, and always came well prepared with drinks he was willing to share. Sometimes his wife came along with him, and she wasn't bad either. I'll refer to them as Mr. and Mrs. Fisherman. When I told my wife I met a fisherman friend that brought his wife with him sometimes, she was instantly jealous and worried that I had flirted with Mrs. or liked her. I was too mature to feed into this, so I just laughed and told my wife I thought she was cute for being possessive of me. I had no idea she was about to ruin my life. She wanted to start tagging along on my fishing trips so she could get to know the people I hung out with. I think the four of us went on about 6 fishing trips together. In between those were times where I went alone, or just me and Mr. Fisherman would go. On a night when I fished alone, I got a text from Mrs. Fisherman. She asked me if I was with her husband because he told her his plans were to go fishing with me. I told her no, I wasn't, which was decidedly out of character for him. He was usually very true to his word. I waited another hour and 15 minutes before packing up and going home. I was surprised my wife wasn't there. I called her several times with no answer. She returned home after 20 minutes, breathless. She said she didn't expect me back so soon and that she'd gone to a Zumba class. This was pretty hard to believe. My wife did Zumba occasionally, but the class never went this late and it was far enough of a drive that she should have caught her breath by now. I wasn't sure how to approach her about it. We'd been married for 48 years, so the fact that I was suspicious of her was devastating. I just asked her if she knew where Mr. Fisherman was. As soon as I asked, I felt my phone vibrate with a text. My wife's heart was pounding, but she tried to be as normal as possible as she told me she hadn't seen him. She couldn't look me in the eye. I went upstairs to take a shower and found Mr. Fisherman's hat. Puzzled and growing concerned, I could only think the worst. I pulled out my phone and saw the text from Mrs. Fisherman. She said Mr. Fisherman just got home and he was acting weird. He said he lost his hat at the lake with me, but she already knew I didn't see him that evening. I sent her a picture of his hat laying on the floor of my bedroom. It was easy to see the bed was made in a hurry. We were disturbed at this point, figuring they must have slept with each other secretly. It was slightly easier to go through this with someone that was experiencing the same betrayal. They've been married 43 years. I wouldn't wish this on anyone, but surround yourself with people. Talk to people about what you're going through because I never expected to lose the love of my life to something so needless and avoidable. After we grieved a little, we decided the next logical step would be to catch them in the act, and since we were certain they were seeing each other behind our backs, we went ahead and prepared divorce papers. I was at work 3 days later with divorce papers ready when Mrs. Fisherman texted me saying Mr. Fisherman said he was going fishing, but she didn't believe him. A follow-up text said she went to the lake shortly after he left, and he was nowhere in sight. We met outside my house and quietly unlocked the door. We heard noises upstairs, so we ran up with racing hearts and found them having sex. I had to look away while they freaked out and ended the session, frantically starting to dress. My wife was already crying. AP just kept saying Mrs. Fisherman's name, staring at her as he dressed. Like if you looked away, she'd disappear. They were both realizing how bad they messed up. They were just caught betraying us, the two people who loved and supported them for most of our lives. This level of betrayal and the feeling you get is indescribable. I had no idea how to behave. I was embarrassed. So I just threw the divorce papers at my wife's feet and left. Mrs. Fisherman ran out of the house with her cheating husband, AP, following close behind. They were divorced by the time my wife and I were. We had adult children that were so disappointed in her. Their relationship was never the same. They were as surprised and hurt as I was. She moved into a place 45 minutes away. The rest of her life didn't compare to what she lost. Everything she lived for the past 48 years was gone or tainted. I'm grateful for my kids calling me and keeping me involved with family affairs. Let this be a lesson to all. Cheating only brings pain and regret. OP, I can't believe your wife cheated on you with a married friend you met fishing. It started as something fun and calm to do together with another couple who were also married for a long time. Your ex turned it into an unexpected opportunity to bring distrust and the end of your marriage. It's a shame that they couldn't resist this temptation for the betterment of their relationships and the lives they built with each of you. Because of this senseless infidelity, your wife's relationship with her kids has changed for the worse. I'm glad you had support during this and after the fact as well. Do your best to remain hopeful and treat others the way you'd like to be treated. Honesty and compassion are main ingredients and everyday practice in a meaningful, successful marriage. I hope you are able to heal from this. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. Take care. My wife, 35, became selfish and distant because she was secretly seeing our neighbor. I let her distance herself from me and made a decision to focus on me and what I needed and enjoyed. The marriage had become a burden on my shoulders, and I enjoyed my time alone. Our stupid relationship clouded my days and made me feel like I had to solve a giant metaphorical jigsaw puzzle before I could eat or sleep. At the time, I still didn't know why my wife pulled away and limited our conversations to who was taking the trash out that night. I was outside, gardening, trying to keep myself positive when she came outside the house, smiled at someone I couldn't see, then looked around first before walking towards them. I peeked around the corner to watch her and see if I could tell who it was. It was our much older neighbor. He must have been at least 10 years older than my wife. My stomach completely flopped when he planted a huge kiss on her and tapped her, but when she walked away. The fact that she was cheating on me with someone so close explained why she wasn't on her phone all the time. She would just go outside all the time for walks. A while ago, she stopped cooking for me. It was really annoying because I was a terrible chef and I tried asking her to make me stuff, but she always had an excuse and said it would be better if we ate separately due to work schedule conflicts. It wasn't that much of a difference. She just wanted me to starve. So I took the time to cook lasagna in the kitchen, leaving no space for her to make dinner for a 3-hour window. She was growing impatient. So I took this time to tell her it wasn't even for me to eat. It was for someone else. Of course, this made her wonder if I was making it for her. So she asked who it was for, and I said the older neighbor next door who was moving away. She looked confused and immediately asked if I meant Tim AP. I said yeah, and I thought he already told her when she was outside with him. She turned red and looked at me, but then walked away. I don't think she cared very much if I saw, so it was good I had been distancing myself too, and chose not to worry about her or our relationship. I finally had enough happen to motivate me to move out. I was being disrespected, and she did not care. There's no repairing a relationship when one person's unwilling and sleeping with a neighbor. I know she was sleeping with him because I hid in our house one day when she had him come over to bang. I recorded the audio pretty clearly and used it to file for divorce. She told me she never thought I'd actually move out or file for divorce, and she felt bad we ended how we did. That interaction with her was mild compared to 3 weeks later when AP unexpectedly passed away. Then she was hysterical, asking me to take her back because he was gone. I told her I'd have to be one gullible son of a gun if I took her up on that offer. She was no longer the woman or wife I desired, and I was going to find one. She tried to spread rumors about me in her anger, but few of her friends knew the truth and argued with her. It started this string of comments and insults against my wife's character. After she made a few enemies, she deleted the post that was intended to garnish sympathy for her. Sadly, 3 weeks after AP passed away, my wife found out she was pregnant. I knew it was not my child. So she was pregnant with a deceased man. She had her mom move in with her to help afford the house and raise the baby. It was not an arrangement she was happy with. She has no privacy and certainly a rough dating life ahead of her. She felt like it was partially my fault she was in this situation, and I thought she was crazy. I wasn't the one that cheated, and it certainly wasn't up to me to reconnect and communicate with her. I haven't felt the need to start dating again. I've just been settling into my new place and making it my next home. The time I spent distancing before the divorce really helped to prepare me for this step. Wow, OP. I am sorry your wife pushed you away for someone else and didn't even have the decency to tell you or have a conversation about breaking up or what was actually wrong between the two of you. Sometimes the hardest conversations have to be had if there's any chance for reconciliation or a good resolution. If someone is to be ready to commit to a relationship, they must be willing to say what's on their mind, no matter what their spouse will think. Obviously, be considerate of each other's feelings, and don't say anything to hurt the other person. Just tell them how you feel and what you believe needs to be resolved. If someone isn't mature enough to listen and consider the other's perspective without judgment or hostility, they may not be mature enough to have a committed romantic relationship. Thank you for sharing your story of hardship and personal growth. Now let's get into today's second story. My wife, 47, and I, 43, had a wonderful relationship. We trusted each other, talked, cooked together, shared our incomes, and these things never changed. She knew she was extremely talented and smart, but she was humble about it. She didn't like women that loved staring in the mirror camera on social media or hearing their own voices. I never noticed anything weird about her or anything I would have changed. I appreciated her and counted on our long conversations every day. We were married for 20 years and had one teenager depending on us. I knew our relationship was the perfect example for him to watch, and it made me proud. That changed the moment someone told me my wife was cheating on me. It was 25 minutes after she left for a place she volunteers at. The neighbor across from our apartment knocked on my door and said he was standing on the porch for a smoke when he saw my wife kiss the man that gave her a ride somewhere. I started pouring sweat and asked him if he was sure it was my wife. He said yes, of course. He said it wasn't the first time he saw her get in this guy's car, but it was the first time he saw a romantic gesture. I knew it was the Christian married man my wife carpooled with for volunteering. I couldn't believe he'd stoop so low and go behind his wife's back knowing the woman he was wooing was married as well. This guy needed to face the consequences. I set up a small security camera so the next time she went with him in his car, I'd see what they did. It worked like a charm. I caught another bold kiss right in front of our apartment complex. What was my wife thinking? You don't just start kissing other people when you've been married for 20 years and have a teenage son to be an example for. When my wife got home, I showed her the video. I'm pretty sure she had to change her pants. She was mortified. She tried to say it didn't mean anything. It was just supposed to be like a friendly greeting kiss, but I wasn't buying that. I told her she had to stop volunteering so I could keep an eye on her. She agreed wholeheartedly, and I agreed not to tell her son anything yet. I certainly dreaded the thought of having to tell him his mom and I were getting a divorce. So we went everywhere together for 3 months. Then she started asking me if she could go to various places real quick, like the library, food store, gas station, a lunch run, or whatever else she thought was innocent sounding but disinteresting enough for me not to go. I knew she was trying to get me used to her going places without me again. I waited a while before I followed her to the gas station. She didn't need cigarettes or anything, and the car had a full tank of gas. Just as I thought she met up with AP, she got in his car, and they sped off. I was barely able to keep up. I thought for sure they'd notice my car, but neither of them did. I took pictures of her going inside his house, then drove home. I walked around outside while I called the church and asked the receptionist for AP's landline number. When I called it first, no one answered. I waited 1 hour before calling again. By now my son asked where his mom was. I told him I wasn't sure but probably volunteer again. So now I was lying to our son, and she was going to cause us to divorce. so much for being our son's wonderful example of a married couple. I knew he could still learn something from all of this when he was older, but I was bitter at the time. He went up to his room and AP's wife answered when I called the second time. I told her she wasn't gonna want to hear what I had to tell her, and it would probably be better if her husband wasn't around. She said he wasn't and pressed me to go on. I told her the truth and mentioned the proof I had. She was completely blown away. Just like me, her husband's behavior never changed and they had a good marriage. I apologized and sent her the proof. AP's wife agreed to help me by playing a role in a plan to really get back at them. She showed her cheating husband the evidence, but told him he could keep the house if he signed divorce papers immediately. He agreed, but the divorce papers she put together said she could keep the house. He wasn't very observant, so she pretended to move out, staying in my apartment while her divorce papers were finalized and AP moved my ex into his house. My son was very understanding when I explained that she really needed a place to stay. My divorce was also finalized and the landlord took my wife's name off the apartment since she thought she was moving in with AP happily ever after. I could not believe my wife didn't care more about leaving her teenage son to live with just his father. She didn't take the time to talk with him or anything. She heard him, I know. He told her she did, and when she finally called him full of shame, that was after AP's wife returned with papers ordering them to vacate the premises. My wife begged me to let her come back. I overheard my son on the phone with her telling her he didn't want her to come back just to leave again, and he knew I wouldn't and shouldn't take her back. He was very mature, but I hated that he was so involved in this, just because my wife needed a place to stay now. So since they had nowhere to go for a while, they stayed in a hotel, and then AP got an opportunity to stay with someone, but he couldn't take my ex with him. He left without hesitation, giving her $50 as a parting gift. What a loser. She was left in a bad place. I think she started sleeping in the church, but no one told me anything about her, and she wouldn't talk to me or our son about her situation. I know she was feeling the consequences of losing the long-term family she helped create. I hope to hear this stops people from cheating. Wow. OP. I am sorry your wife took advantage of the trust you had in her by starting an affair with another person you should have been able to trust. It's hard to feel sorry for them when they've made such terribly selfish decisions. Why couldn't they have both humbled themselves and simply honored their vows, spouses and children? It's terrible how easy it is for some people to not care and break the hearts of people dearest to them. No one should have to face this betrayal after dedicating themselves to someone for 20 years. I know you'll find hope in your recovery. Remember to live life moment to moment and let go of the things you can't control. I sincerely wish you luck and genuine love with a wise partner. Thanks for sharing your story. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also comment below with your thoughts on what happened. Take care. I had just gotten out of a long-term relationship when I, 34 male, met my wife, 35 female. It hadn't been a traumatic breakup. The two of us were just growing apart and wanted different things out of life. So we decided it was better to break up. A few months after that breakup, I bumped into a woman who introduced herself as Katie. We just started talking in a coffee shop and hit it off. When we exchanged numbers, I did warn her that I had just gotten out of a serious relationship, which meant I wasn't ready for anything serious or anything at all. She waited until I was ready, which was pretty amazing for me. I thought that a woman willing to wait for me must have interested me, right? It ended up not being the case. But at the time it truly did seem like I found someone good for me. We took it slow, and within a year and a half, the two of us were moving in together. After another 6 months, I proposed and we were planning a wedding. The wedding went off without a hitch. The two of us were financially stable at the time of our wedding. I had a decent job, and so did my wife. While we might not have been as rich as the 1%, the two of us could be considered middle class at the very least. Our relationship was also good. We had our ups and downs, but the two of us truly did seem to be creating a great life together. For the first 3 years, everything seemed great until my wife started working on a particular project at work that was difficult, or this was what I thought of at the time. She was working long hours and just spending a lot of time out of the house. I missed her, but I understood that she was busy at work. When I had an important project at work, she supported me. I kept asking when she would be finished, but my wife kept extending the deadline. This has been going on for nearly 6 months now. It made no sense why she would still be spending all these late nights at work. It got to the point where I couldn't deny that something wasn't right there. So I went on to her laptop that she had brought home from work. Her home laptop didn't have anything. I already checked. This meant the evidence had to be there. I didn't know what evidence I was looking for, but I knew there had to be something on her laptop that would explain to me what was going on. On her laptop, I found several emails from an email account I didn't even know she had. On this email were dozens of emails that were shared between this unknown man. They were all of a romantic or sexual nature, which only confirmed the truth that I was afraid to admit to myself. She was cheating on me. When she came back home from picking up dinner for us, I had the laptop out in the open with the emails right there so she could see that I knew everything. My wife didn't say anything at first. She looked like she was in shock, so I took the chance to ask her who was the guy she was cheating with. My wife screamed, saying I had no right to go into her work laptop because that contained confidential information. I almost wanted to laugh because she had been the one to use her work laptop to talk with this guy. So I asked again. He was a former client of the office that she had continued speaking to even after the contract ended. One thing led to another, and they started sleeping together. I asked if she had feelings for him. She said yes. My wife said she was going to eventually tell me that she wanted a divorce so she could move on and be with this man. Once I did a little digging, I discovered this man was very rich. When I say rich, I mean filthy sticking rich. She always loved the finer things in life, but seemed like she wanted to work towards it. I couldn't understand the shift in her personality. Maybe it had always been there, and I was so blinded by my love for her that I just wasn't able to see it. Whatever the reason, I knew this marriage was over. My wife fought it for a bit, but I think she was only doing this because she felt like it was what she had to do. The divorce seemed to take a long time to come to fruition, but in reality, it was just a matter of months. She went one way and I went another. A divorce never was on my radar. Yet here I was newly divorced and alone. My ex-wife already had someone in mind. She posted on social media that she was with a new man and they were engaged to be married. The truth of it was that her so-called fiancé copyright was already married. He told her he was a widow, but his wife wasn't dead. Rather, she was just in another country taking care of an ailing family member. When she returned, everything hit the fan, so to speak. My ex-wife's engagement was called off, but this was a moot point given that her AP was already married. They couldn't get married anyway. After that, her social media posts seemed to become quite erratic. She was posting about how she had lost her soulmate, but what I think she was upset losing was her wealthy AP. It was all about the money. This guy was going to help her get to that lifestyle much faster. Meanwhile, after my divorce, I reconnected with the girl from the past whom I had originally cut things off with just before meeting Katie. The two of us were friends for a while before we realized that we were finally in a place where we could give this a second try. She knew about my divorce and was sympathetic. When word got back to my ex that I was back with this particular woman, she went ballistic and started blasting me all over social media. She spent so much time blasting me and her AP over all her social media that her job started to become in jeopardy from what I heard. My wife was put on probation at her place of work. They were a public company, so things you could post could be used against them in some way. I just chose to shut down my social media for the time being because reading her posts was doing nothing but causing stress for me. As far as I know, she has been moved to another department and isn't making as much money as she once was. This is all on my ex. If she had just been happy for what she had, then all of that could have been prevented. My current girlfriend and I are talking about marriage, but are trying to take it very slow right now. The last thing I want to do is run into anything without being completely sure. Don't want to make the same mistake twice. OP, it's almost poetic to think that you ended up in a relationship with the girlfriend you were with all those years ago. It's a shame that you had to go through your ex cheating on you followed by a divorce to get back to her. No one should have to go through that. Your ex truly is a piece of work. She's lucky that she didn't lose her job completely for having a relationship with a former client and using her work computer no less. In my opinion, they should have fired her the second they found out about it. However, again, this is just my opinion. It's almost laughable that her relationship with the AP turned out the way she did. What did she expect from someone willing to sleep with a woman? I imagine most people with any sense aren't going to be surprised he was lying the entire time, just like your ex was. Good on you for moving on and taking it slow with your new girlfriend. It seems like the two of you have something special. Of course, things could change, but this is the point of taking it slow, to make sure no mistakes are made as you mentioned at the end of your post. Now for our next story. I, 49 male, met my wife, 49 female, when we were in our mid-20s. We were friends for a while before we decided to date. The two of us dated for around a year, which isn't that long in the grand scheme of things, but at the time it seemed like we had been dating long enough. She mentioned us getting married, and I said I wanted to wait a little longer. Within a few months, I finally was ready to propose to my then girlfriend. She accepted, and the two of us started planning a wedding. It was around this point I should recognize the red flags, but I didn't. Why? Well, I was in love. See, my fiancé wanted a huge wedding. While I understand it was a special experience, I didn't see the point of spending a couple grand on what was essentially one day. I ended up convincing her to have a small, intimate ceremony. She seemed all right with it at the time, but I think as the months and years went by, she almost started to resent me for talking her into that. The thing is, we couldn't have afforded such a wedding at the time. I suggested that one day we could have the wedding of her dreams one day, if we decided to renew her vows. This seemed to please her, but again, I felt like this resentment was always there, just lingering beneath the surface. Was I the most romantic guy in the world? No, but I tried hard to keep the romance alive by doing little things for her over the years, and it wasn't like my wife didn't know this when we got married. We also didn't have kids, so there wasn't that pressure hanging over us. The years passed, and by the time we were in our 40s, we had been married for almost 2 decades. Things had gotten stale for the past year or so, which led me to plan a romantic night out. I even asked my sister for help because, like I said, I wasn't very romantic. It ended up not going anywhere. My wife never came home that night, and when she did, she said that she had stayed at a friend's house. They had been drinking, so she figured it was safer for her to just spend the night there. I saw no reason to not believe her, so I took her at her word. The next night I tried again, and we had a pleasant dinner. When I tried to initiate intimacy, she brushed me off, saying she was too tired. Again, I didn't think too much of it. We both worked a lot, which was why we were finally able to afford the lifestyle we were currently living. This trend continued, and it got to the point where I had to ask myself if I was going to continue to believe her stupid lies, which were lies. I reached out to her friends to see if she was there, but they covered for her. I shouldn't have been surprised. The only way I could think was to directly confront her about her lies and ask her if she was cheating. To my surprise, she admitted everything the night I confronted her. I think I was in shock that she just straight up told me that she was cheating. Honestly, I don't know what I was expecting. I think I thought she might try to deny it and tell me that I was wrong, but she didn't do any of that, so I asked who it was and how long it had been going on. He was a family member of one of friends she met one day. It was an instant attraction, and he was so romantic. There it was, the one thing that I could never manage to do. I did try, but my wife didn't think that I was trying hard enough. This guy was everything I wasn't and more, she claimed. Our marriage ended that night, and what began was the divorce process. It wasn't a bitter divorce. We agreed to split everything down the middle. The house would be sold, and we each take half. This seemed like the best option for us to get away from each other quickly. Once everything was final, I bought a condo with the money we split from the joint account. I still had a decent amount left over that I was going to keep for a nest egg. Eventually the house sold, and I put that money away as well. You never knew when you were going to need it. My ex ended up doing the exact opposite. She took her money and bought an even bigger house than the one we lived in with each other. Then I heard that she was planning a wedding. A very huge wedding, I might add. It was the wedding she had always wanted. I was having flashbacks to the wedding we had all those years ago. My ex had resented me for all these years because we never had the wedding she truly wanted. As embarrassing as it is to admit, I did look at pictures on Facebook afterwards, and my God, it was a huge affair. Everything looked so expensive. I can just imagine how much money she spent on the whole thing, including the dress. At that point, I knew I had to take a step back and stop obsessing over this woman who was my ex. I focused on spending time with my friends and family, which helped. I assumed my ex was spending time with her AP. Turns out, though, not everything was great. I learned that a year after they got married, they were in debt. My ex spent the divorce settlement on the expensive house and expensive wedding, making it so she had nothing left. Her job did bring in a decent amount of income. My ex was the only one making good money in that household because the AP was a bum. She dared him out to me to see if I could lend her some money. My ex played on our past relationship and the memories we made over 2 decades, but I wasn't buying it. I told her that it wasn't my problem that she spent all of her divorce settlement on pointless crap. I hung up on her and proceeded to receive at least 3 more calls from her that night along with 3 very nasty voicemails. After I listened to them, I just laughed and played them to my friends to show how far she had fallen. They all found them as funny as I did. My ex truly had no shame or was just that desperate. I don't know if she ever truly believed that I would give her the money or not. Even if she had reached out to me a few months prior, I still wouldn't have given it to her. At no point was I ever that desperate. I blocked her number that night because I didn't want to hear another word from her. We were done. She cheated and wanted to go be with her AP, who was the new love of her life. If she had planned better, then my ex would have money just like I still did. Most of my family and friends were happy to see her go. I wonder if they had ever liked her, or just tried to get along with her for my sake. It didn't matter anymore though, because my ex was a part of my past, and that was where she was going to stay. OP, you made the right decision all those years ago not to have an expensive wedding. It's only one day out of your entire life. It's not to say that you can't make it special, but rent a wedding dress. Don't get a hugely expensive venue either. Make it a nice and small intimate affair. The one thing I'll give your ex is that she did own up to it right away. It doesn't change the fact that she never should have cheated on you in the first place, but at least she didn't continue to lie even when the evidence was right there. It's quite ironic that your ex was finally able to plan the wedding of her dreams, but it ended up being what was truly her downfall. She probably realizes now that it was a bad choice to waste all that money not only on a huge house she probably didn't need, but a huge wedding. To think she reached out to you for money means she must have been desperate. Good on you for shutting it down and leaving her to deal with the consequences. She made her bed of debt, and now she is going to have to lie in it with her bum of a husband. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. Take care. Around the time my wife and I were celebrating our 15th wedding anniversary and oldest daughter's birthday, I used my wife's phone without her knowledge and found that she had Google questions about divorce. I was shaking as I looked through her phone messages. I figured if I didn't know this, I might not know about something else, and I was right. She was messaging a girlfriend of hers about how she was tired of me, tired of being a housewife, and wanted a chance to live her life how she wanted. Her friend talked about another man that she thought was me, but my wife corrected her, saying she was thinking of her boyfriend. Her friend advised her to file for divorce and end the marriage before she was caught cheating. She should have taken her friend's advice, but my bored housewife said she needed more time to secure her future life in advance. She wanted to make sure AP was ready for her to move in. She admitted that she planned to have AP over at our house the next time I left for a few days. I didn't know if this was the first time or just the only time she told her friend about it. She was saying terrible things, but she expected her friend to understand, not criticize her. Her friend said she was living an unfulfilled life, so she had every right to do what she wanted. That's when my wife added that she even planned to let me have full custody of our kids. I was shocked and heartbroken. It was like she didn't realize or care about how much this would affect them. I searched her phone for any secret messaging app, but I couldn't find anything, so I didn't know who AP was. I sent myself proof of this conversation and put my wife's phone back exactly where it was, moving away from its icons before she came into the room. I looked really upset, but I used that to add credibility to my lie. I said I just got off the phone with my boss, who needed me to go on a business trip in place of a sick coworker. She looked pleased about it, but had to pretend she was disappointed. She snatched her phone and left the room. I packed and gave my wife a heartfelt goodbye and kiss. She didn't know it was the last time I would kiss her. I drove somewhere else for 2 hours. When I came back, my mom's newest husband's car was outside her house. My heart was racing as I recalled the last time we had a family gathering. My wife was definitely talking to him. I couldn't hear much, but she had flirty eyes and stood really close to him. We attended their wedding 2 years prior, and my wife said he looked incredible for his age. I'm sure his wealth didn't attract her at all. More family outings came to mind where my wife and stepdad were alone, or could have done something right under my nose. I then went through the back door because the lock was broken. Thankfully, Our kids were staying with friends for the weekend. Finding the downstairs empty, I went upstairs and knocked on the locked bedroom door. I heard my wife suck in air that she didn't let out for the next 20 minutes. It took her 2 minutes to open the door, and I could hear more than one person scrambling around to clean up and get dressed. When she opened the door, my mom's husband was standing shamefully beside her bed. It was the only place to stand in the room. The bed was quickly made. You could tell they were just on it. So I told them they were caught. I knew they were sleeping with each other because I saw my wife's phone earlier. The P looked ashamed and extremely embarrassed to be in this position. My wife was only upset because her future was now uncertain. Knowing who AP was, I concluded that she expected him to leave my mother so they could move in together. Now the tables had turned. I had proof. So even if she changed her mind and just wanted to keep the affair going, where AP broke up with her, there was no going back. AP asked me to forgive him and promised that if I didn't tell my mother, he would rededicate his life to making her the happiest woman alive. I just gave him a cold, hard look since he thought I would actually buy that garbage. He looked at my wife for a split second, saying he made a huge mistake by seeing her without my knowledge. I don't think he could say what they did out loud. I asked, but he just crossed his arms, covered his mouth, and looked down. I asked if they slept together, and he shamefully nodded. My wife then said she was wrong for betraying my trust and needed me in her life. She said she was sorry for believing she was bored and needed a change. I asked my despicable stepfather to leave. My wife begged me to get into bed with her and let this go. She said 13 out of 15 years of loyalty isn't too bad, and I should be able to forgive and stay with her, meaning she was having this affair with AP for 2 years since their wedding day. I told her she was disgusting to ruin my mother's marriage and ours, and she was going to lose her husband, children, and home because of this. The tears started flowing again, but I did not care. She was not the person I thought she was. Later that night, I slept in the guest room without saying another word to her. I also called my mom and told her what happened. She was absolutely heartbroken, but thanked me for letting her know. I stayed in that room for the time it took to get the divorce finalized. My mom was also planning on divorcing AP. I didn't tell the kids what happened, but I'm sure they knew something was going on since me and their mom were quite distant. I think my wife hoped I would change my mind last minute if she behaved honorably while we went through the motions. AP swore via text he would never forgive himself, and he vowed to me that he would never see my wife again. I wondered if he realized he just gave me proof to show my mother. Not that I needed it. She would probably believe me. While waiting for the divorce to become final, I told my wife that her income was going to pay all the bills. That was the least she could do for the heartbreak she caused me. She agreed, and she spent lots of time with our children, which was bittersweet to me. I saved up money and sold some of my baseball card collection to gather enough for a down payment on a house. It had 2 sections, one for me and one for my mother. Then, just after the divorce was final, I told her the truth about her husband. She was devastated, but at least I was able to soften the blow by telling her about our new way of living. She took a week to have it out with AP and back her things, but I was there with her. No one should have to go through this. But when I considered keeping the truth from her, it didn't feel right. After proving my wife's infidelity and willingness to give me the house in custody, the judge found it impossible to believe her lies. She was forced to move in with the only person willing to have her, which was her boss. You can imagine how awkward it must have been when she had no choice but to fire her due to her poor job performance. I sold the house to help me pay off the deluxe duplex with 3 bedrooms each. My kids love the house and told me they're old enough to understand that life is full of change. They actually thanked me for handling this as well as I could for them. OP, you've been in quite a disaster here. I can't imagine how badly I would have reacted to what you came to discover that fateful day. You handled this right from the start, and I respect you for obtaining a new home for your children and mother before burdening them with the truth. You spared them much of the stress and worry that you endured, and I am proud of you. You turned a miserable situation of dishonesty and uncertainty into something that could be overcome. Your wife and stepfather were inexcusable. They lied and hid an affair from the people that trusted them more than anyone else in the world. You did well to maintain your children's trust. If only your wife would have honored and appreciated the life and family you two built together. Instead, She was willing to go behind your back and maintain an affair. I honestly don't believe she ever intended to divorce you. Opie. She was too scared and comfortable with you and the kids. I am so glad you found a way to catch her red-handed. So there was no way for her to escape the reality of what she'd done. I wish you, your children, and your mother the best of luck in life. Thank you for sharing your story. Now on to our next story for today. My wife, 34, had issues getting pregnant for a handful of years. After we were blessed to have our first two children, our third child was stillborn. It was very traumatic because we didn't expect it. After two successful pregnancies, we thought everything would be okay. Instead, we arrived at the hospital only to find out the devastating truth. We had to gently explain what happened to our older children, and it wasn't easy. We closed the door to the nursery and never opened it again. Just a few months later, my wife was back to work, and she started escaping to the bathroom during family time. Before walking into the kitchen, I looked over my wife's shoulder as she unlocked her phone to discover her passcode. Then I just kept watching as she replied to a message from AP. As we sat on the couch having a movie night with our children, I couldn't react because the kids were there. That night, I checked her phone and found more extremely inappropriate texts to her coworker. They talked about work, but mostly it was about my wife, her grief, and what she needed to feel better. I woke her up in the middle of the night to confront her. She was extremely remorseful and shamed. She said now that I had caught her, reality was sinking in. So she promised to shut it down and cut him off completely. This was followed by many hard talks, but I thought we were moving forward. She told me they never slept with each other, despite all her talk about wanting to take him. I doubted her truthfulness, but I didn't want to believe my marriage was over. We went to therapy, but it ultimately didn't help because all my wife's friends and family justified her behavior by saying they understood she just needed an escape after suffering such a huge loss. Even the therapist seemed like her behavior was justified because of her grief. Why did she deserve an escape and forgiveness when no one bothered to ask how I was handling the loss? I went through hell, handling my own grief while giving her a shoulder to cry on, only to find out she was escaping behind my back. She went so far as to tell AP she wanted him in our bed while she was home alone. When I started to consider cheating on her as revenge or to make us even, I realized there was no corrective action I could take to bring back the wife I thought I had. Since she had the approval of her friends, family, and her therapist, I decided to see how her coworkers would feel about her escaping habit. I got permission to hang up my flyer on the bulletin board by vaguely describing it as a way to spread awareness of despicability. The boss was busy at the time, so she let me hang it up. All of my wife's coworkers saw the worst text she received. Besides a text box I wrote describing our family and what we were all doing together while she had the nerve to send these. When she went into work for her next shift, she received so much criticism and slander that she returned home crying. That's when I gave her a copy of the flyer. There wasn't much she could say in her defense because I knew everything. She wanted me to forgive her and stay married, and that just couldn't happen. She wasn't the woman I married. She gave me up for an escape with another man. I don't see how us losing a child is any excuse for her to cheat on me. I'm sure that if I was the one doing this, I would have been shunned. It was a sweet relief to me that she quit her job. She was suffering from the reality she didn't want to face, and now I'd followed through with the divorce. A woman worthy of a wife's title would never betray the husband she had children with just because they lost a child. They would support each other in the worst of times so that moving forward became possible. They would act as pillars so their children's world could remain stable. So after the divorce, I moved myself and the children onto my cousin's farm. I heard animals can be therapeutic, and that's what I wanted us to be surrounded by. Certainly not a constant reminder of the life we used to live with their mother. She was able to stay in the house since I let her have it in the divorce. I still think she wishes for me to see it her way, but I don't understand how she can justify it. Opie, I am so sorry your wife slept with another man and thought it was okay. It's really shocking that many people in her life accepted this behavior. They didn't realize they were operating as enablers in her life and making you feel like you were crazy for believing it wasn't okay. It's so good that you knew cheating wouldn't solve anything, and this thought was only a sign that you needed to end the marriage. Speaking honestly with each other would have been the solution, but I don't think your wife was willing to admit that what she was doing was wrong, especially not with the approval of her peers. I wonder what she would have thought if you asked her for permission to cheat, since it was apparently an escape and a way to handle the grief. After suffering such a loss, you both suffered the loss of your marriage and family. I'm thankful for the handle this. You needed to create a better, safe place for you and your children. So that's what you did. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories.